everyone, this is David Stark from WatcherPass.com, your website for movie reviews, interviews, and recommendations. Today, I'm joined by Ashish Pant, the writer and director of The Knot, or Uljhan. We're going to talk to Ashish in just a second, but first, let's check out the trailer, and while you're watching, if you can like and subscribe to this channel, that would be fantastic. It helps me out a lot. Thank you.
देखो कुछ नहीं चलो घर चलो
शीश देख कर आ
अरे कुछ नहीं है भर्ती कराने जाएंगे तो सीधा एक्सीडेंट का केस बन जाएगा
गलती तो हमारी है ना
पुलिस में रिपोर्ट लिखानी पड़ेगी और कौन विश्वास करेगा कि आप गाड़ी चला रहे थे
जेका भाग्य का थे वो पिछले जन्म के कर्मन का फल होता है
उसने हमें आज पैसे लाते देखा और कुछ ही घंटों में उसका भाई इतना बीमार हो गया मनोज का भाई हमारी जिम्मेदारी नहीं
हमारी जिम्मेदारी
नहीं है
So thank you so much for joining me. This is Ashish Pant, the writer and director of The Knot, or Uljhan, which is coming out on March 31st, 2021. It's a very interesting Hindi film. It's not really what I expected. I've seen a decent amount of movies based in India, and this was a lot more serious and had a lot more weight than I think a lot of film coming out of that country normally carries. So it was a fascinating look in just kind of class structure and hierarchy in India, and kind of people trying to rise above their station, and kind of the social and societal impediments to that. So it's a really well constructed film, and it's your first film, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That is amazing. So how did this film come about? I read some of the notes. It sounds like this stems from an event that affected you at a very young age and kind of has stayed with you, and you just kind of had to write it down or explore those ideas to really kind of come to terms with it.
Thank you, David, for taking the time. It's a real pleasure being here, and thank you so much for watching the film. As you asked, the genesis of the film comes from an event that happened in my life when I was about 7 years old. I grew up in a town called Lucknow in North India. It's a largish city. And one afternoon, my father was driving us, the entire family, to our grandmother's house for lunch. And, we were at a traffic light, and the light turned green, and my father started the car, and there was this scooter that came sort of flying in from the other side and collided with the car. Within moments, the car was surrounded by people who were all banging onto the windows and windshield and asking us to come out. It was almost like presumed that there had been a mistake made by the car driver. And my father told us to roll up the windows, keep the doors locked, and he stepped out. And you can imagine, as a 7-year-old, I was just terrified.
I can't even imagine. That's already traumatic, and then to have that be the reaction, I can't even imagine what you were thinking.
And so I guess that image sort of got lodged into my brain somewhere. And I was so young that nobody really told us what really happened, but I could sort of sense palpable tension in my family over the next couple of years. Things like that just stay with you. And I think as an artist, what you're trying to do always is express what has affected you and find a form for it to bring it out. And, over the years, I came to live in the US, and every time I went back to the country, as I spent more time got sensitized to things that people who are in India don't tend to see or are invisible to them, because they've got to cope with the day-to-day reality. But every time I went back to India, it sort of always dawned on me as to how sort of disparate we were along class lines, economic lines. And the question always, since I came from a middle class, it was like, how does the middle class and the upper middle class sort of distance themselves from the daily realities of life, and how do we create sort of these bubbles and barriers between us and the rest of the world to sort of go on living in such a disparate condition? And as a result of that, when I was at Columbia many years back doing my MFA in film and writing, directing, I started working on the script where the point of departure was this image in my head, which sort of was, and from that point, I was sort of imagining a rendering of what could have happened in a society that's so divided. And I wrote the first draft. My screenwriting mentor read it and said, look, this seems there's something personal, something really you want to talk about. Just stick on with it, don't give up on it. And that was Steve Moulton, and that was great advice. And I just stuck on with it. And that's literally how, the film started. And then sort of Christopher Zala, who's one of our producers, who's a successful US filmmaker himself, he read the script and he said, there's a movie and I'll help you make it. It seems like it's something you want to really, you really want to talk about. So that's literally the genesis of the project.
And that's so interesting that's, I mean, I understand that how it stuck with you for so long, but like, I don't really remember things from that long ago. So it must've been, such a shock to have not only the event stick in your mind, but then also the reactions as you went back to India, following after you came to America, to have those also, your family's reactions and kind of the dread or that you felt, just wondering what was going to happen with that original incident. That must have really, really affected you. I can't even imagine, just thinking how long that stuck with you.
Yeah.
And then, so, I liked your point about the class structure in India. And I know, I've only kind of experienced that through film. So I imagine it's a very different view than even, growing up over this film. This film seems a little bit more nuanced in the class structure, but it's a really interesting point. And I kind of, I loved is the wrong word, but I was fascinated seeing just kind of the different ways in which people in the various classes treat each other. I know that must have been something you wanted to explore as well. Just kind of, the main characters, how they kind of treated people above them versus people below them, and how the people below treated, the middle class. It was so fascinating just to see the deference that was given. And is that something that, it must be a common occurrence? Is that something that's changing in India, or is that something that, people would like to see change? How is the current climate in India, given the various, castes of people and classes of people?
So yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you sort of were able to bring those elements out, because one thing, and this is a great chance for me, an opportunity to talk about, is there are certain things, of course, that are sort of lost in translation, even though I am attempting to communicate the story to as wide an audience as possible. But for instance, you picked up a lot of these things just in common, mundane, day-to-day behavior of people versus each other. But there were, even just to add to certain few elements, which you might have missed simply because of the language differences, is that in the film, the way people speak, every single person, how they speak is reflective of where they are in the class, which is, of course, when we subtitle the film, it's lost. But so, for instance, the maid and the driver speak in a dialect that is not Hindi. It's a dialect of Hindi, which is very regional. Even between the husband and wife, the wife comes from slightly upper, sort of more privileged upbringing than the husband, who grew up in probably a more modest upbringing. And so when he talks to the driver, he slips into the local dialect, which he never speaks to with his wife or at work, and he will never use an English word throughout the film. Whereas we are so used to, in the middle class and upper middle class, of speaking what's called English, which is a mixture of Hindi, English. We don't even we just mix all these words. And whereas the wife uses English words, which tells you where she might have been educated and stuff like that. When he goes to the office of the bureaucrat, the Hindi actually the bureaucrat is speaking is it's so pure that even people in India sometimes saying, and that is almost like the bureaucrat is using it as a weapon, to tell this businessman that, look, I'm superior to you intellectually, and you won't even understand what I'm talking about. And many times our sort of male protagonist, sort of always confirms what he has heard, right? He's like, so you mean this? That's because the guy's speaking in such a pure form of Hindi that it's like he's not sure what he's trying to tell, but it's truly a weapon. So what I was trying to show was that class structure is even seeped into our language. the music, I've used folk music because Lucknow is a cultural capital of India, in North India. It's one of the most culturally rich heritages. And so one of the folk forms that's used in the film is the song. What I wanted to show was it's the ringtone of the maid, but it's bastardized with the disco beat, But when the driver hears it in the car, it's the traditional, and the female protagonist tells him to shut it down, shut it off, because for her it's too crude, for the driver to be listening to this music in front of her. Whereas the husband quite enjoys it. He lets the driver play the music, and then because he's coming from somewhere in between. And so when he comes back home, you can hear he's sort of humming that tune. And the wife is almost like, what are you humming? So what I wanted to show was that even how we consume music, depending on who we are, there's like a wrinkle, like it changes its form, even though it's the same composition. So those were sort of more even things which might have been lost in translation, but you picked up a lot of them in terms of interaction.
This is a spoiler warning. We're going to start getting into some aspects of the film. If you haven't seen it yet, I would recommend it. It's available in virtual cinemas and it should be available to rent digitally. I would definitely recommend watching it first and then coming back and listening to the conversation. So thank you so much.
Now, coming to this point of, is there pressure, for things to change? And I would like to point out the one instant where I really wanted to bring that out, the point you're making, which is this idea when at the end they break into the house, the three of them, the two younger people, right? While the older person, which is the driver, he's slightly older than them, almost like the uncle, he says, no, we shouldn't do this because he's a believer in karma, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have asked me, why is it in such a disparate, sort of economically disparate, country like India, why don't you have more day-to-day violence? It's kind of fascinating how, given the situation, you would imagine it would be extremely dangerous to just go out of your house, Yeah. But we don't see that much day-to-day violence. And one of the things I've always thought about, the balm sort of that serves, is this Hindu sort of philosophy concept of karma. And this idea that a lot of people accept that their station in life, in this life, is a result of something they might have done in their past lives. And so they must try to live a life which is good so that they have a better future life. It's almost like this idea that we deserve in some strange way. It's a result of maybe not from this life, but from another life. We are all part of a big karmic cycle. And that driver believes it. You might remember when he has a conversation with the male protagonist in the car, the discussion about karma. But what I wanted to show was when the young people are in that moment, in the heat of the moment, they don't buy it. They are like, no, they must pay for what they did. They must pay the money. They must accept the mistakes. And I think that's the change that's happening. What's happening is that we are a connected world today. There are 800 million cell phones in India. Everybody has a cell phone, and they can see how people live across the world. They can see. And I think what it's doing is it is challenging a lot of these sort of cultural philosophical notions that were very sort of part of our milieu. But today people are saying, no, I want justice today, right here. I don't buy it. And partly what I wanted to talk through this film was, I was trying to talk to the middle class and the bulk, sort of the people, and have them think about that. Can we stay divorced from the reality right outside our tall gates and tall walls, or do we have to go out and start a conversation and figure out how we all going to exist together? I mean, because otherwise we could, while we've not had it, but we could have a pretty much more violent and darker future in a country that's that divided on economic lines, and social lines. So absolutely, there are pressure points, there's absolute pressure points in the society. There's so much friction at every level that people are confronting.
Yeah, and there's so many subtle points, like you mentioned, the language thing was fascinating. I read that in the notes. I didn't obviously notice it when I was watching the film. It just felt like there was something a little different. But yeah, the language note was fascinating. I can't even imagine writing in that many dialects and trying to kind of keep the characters separated based on kind of where their class was and what their upbringing was like. I want to explore everything, but let's go with the writing first. I think that's just such a fascinating thing. How was that to write? I mean, I imagine you grew up in Lucknow, so you probably are at least familiar with the various dialects. Was that, did you write them all? Did you kind of write some initial notes and then try to get other people that may be more comfortable in those dialects to kind of critique it? How did that go about?
So it's interesting you asked that. You're the first one who's asked it, so it's a good chance for me to talk about it. I wrote it in Hindi. I wrote first in English. It's weird how India works. I mean, Hindi is unfortunately a dying language, because everyone wants their kids to only learn English because of future and career, etc. You'd be surprised to know in Bollywood, even when scripts are written, even when dialogues are written in Hindi, they want them to be written in English letters.
Oh, wow.
Because people can't read Hindi that fast anymore. It's a tragedy,
Wow.
and for someone who loves Hindi like myself, who's very bilingual, it's a tragedy, but it is what it is. So I wrote the script first in English because, of course, my producers and my screenwriting mentor here, they were both Americans, and and also to pitch to international investors, it was, you needed an English script. Then I translated it to Hindi. However, when it came to writing the Awadhi dialect, which I can understand, but I can't sort of speak it. So my mother, who grew up, who literally is a middle class, I mean, she grew up she sat down and I sat down with her and she wrote the Hindi dialect, in the Awadhi dialect. And it was interesting. Sometimes I was even calling her from the set, saying, hey, this line, we are changing this line. What would it be? Could you speak to the cast about it? Then my father, who was a career bureaucrat, and because of him, a lot of insights about how the government functions in this movie have come from my, first-hand experience with him. He was the one I wanted to get the bureaucrat speak out of, so he helped me write sort of this highly pure academic administrative language, which literally you don't see in Hindi movies. Even people, whose first language is Hindi, even they are flummoxed by the way this guy is speaking, but certain, and especially as there's a lot of rise of, in terms of sort of nationalism as it's happening across the world. So it's happening in India as well. And language is starting to become a weapon, for that. So I wanted to bring those elements in a subtle way. And so, yeah, I really, my parents really helped me sort of make it authentic to the, how these people would really speak.
And what about the, I forget the name of it. Is it Ashwali, the I guess slum or, lower dialect? Was that also your mother who kind of helped with that?
Awadhi, yeah.
Awadhi.
So that was my mother, yeah, because she grew up with that, listening to that. She speaks it. Okay. So I was very keen that the representation, because I said, if I try and not do it authentically, we are actually missing things about class structure, that are seeped into our day-to-day life. But I wanted to bring it out in every possible way, that we experience it.
Yeah, and there, things like that are just, it's fascinating to hear, and it's a shame that, American audiences or maybe audiences that don't speak the dialects that are spoken in Lucknow are not going to get that. I thought that was just such a fascinating point. And there's all these other subtle hints about this film. This film is all about very subtle class points, like the first time the driver and the daughter come into Mr. What was his last name? Mr. Martha, into his house, and they're just like looking up in awe at this house with the trees, and whenever he looks at it, he just sees kind of the clutter, and there's this wonderful shot of him looking up at like an electrical line that's just full of cables and wires, and just kind of, you can feel the disdain that he has for this house that's like a mansion in any other place. And there's all these subtle points like that kind of show just how just economically disparate these groups are. Was there, and I know the film kind of builds towards a more dramatic outburst, but was there any thought of making these more pronounced, or did you like kind of the subtle way to approach them to kind of let people experience what life would normally be like in these situations?
No, I mean, I always think a film is only complete when it meets its audience, and just hear the pleasure of having you respond to things that were in my mind years back is so fascinating to me as a filmmaker, because finally I feel like I'm communicating with someone, and that's so thank you so much for giving these things thought. But no, absolutely, I'm very um, I wanted it to be, with my producer, Indian producer Karthikeyan Narayan Singh, who is a very successful art house producer, and I was very fortunate to sort of work with him. We decided that one of the reasons we decided to work together was because our sensibility was very much sort of rooting things in realism. You know, in terms of sort of making sure our world reflects really what we want to talk about. And I find these things much more fascinating when they're unspoken. But as you, who's not been to India, is able to pick up on these things, I just find that fascinating, because when I watch a foreign film and I'm able to read these images that way, it's so satisfying to me, because I feel like I'm experiencing something rather than being told something, and so those are the kind of films I like as well. And so I guess that was our effort, was to look at every scene and say, well, how would it really happen in this country, given who these people are, these characters are, right? Instead of worrying too much about, well, maybe we need to talk about it a bit more. And yeah, you lose some audience because of that, but it's okay. I mean, you can't make a film for everybody. You can do what you really want to do, and that's what I stuck with. So it's great, some of it's coming through, a lot of it's coming through to you, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely a push and pull. Going back to the language, was there ever any thoughts to, I don't know, I guess maybe change the subtitles, slightly when the different dialects are to, I don't know, maybe vary the grammar. I was kind of thinking like, that would be interesting. But then I also thought as a viewer, I might be like, oh, this is really tough to read, and I don't really know if I want to read it. Was there any? Did you ever throw around some of those ideas?
David, such a great point, that this making this film, this first film, and trying to reach out to audiences of all kinds has been a real learning experience. I'm a big fan of foreign films. I mean, several multi-language films, and I now realize how much of these films I'm missing. I'm like, okay, when I watch a Baskir Ostami's Iranian films, oh God, I might be missing half the film, and I marvel at the fact that I still love him. So I think that's just been, I think it's part of it's part of the challenge of being a filmmaker, and exactly the point you made, which is like, our job as visual storytellers is, well, how much can I sort of bring out in the images, right, in behavior, and maybe that's our challenge if we want to communicate to a broader audience, and so it's okay. I mean, it's a constraint, but it's also a challenge. Challenges or constraints always force you to have sort of be more creative, and I just think it's part of it.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way with foreign films. I kind of, I always like watching the ones that come here, because I feel like, well, it gets you transport into that that part of the world, and especially now when everyone's, locked down, it's a nice window into other cultures. And also, I kind of feel like, if it's coming out of a country, then that must mean it's either interesting or says something, and you want to kind of experience that. So I love catching foreign films, and this was no exception.
Thank you.
So one thing I was wondering, so the accident that you experienced when you were a kid, there it was fairly clear, who was at fault or what happened, at least in your mind. And in this film, it feels very like it feels very unsaid, like what actually happened. You don't really see much of it. Was that, I assume that was part of the, that appeal of this film, is because you don't necessarily know who is right and who is wrong and where the blame lies. Is that always how it was, or was there other versions where you kind of more clearly see what happened?
No, you absolutely identified. And I think what's interesting to me as a filmmaker, but as a storyteller, is always sort of leaving the audience with questions rather than try to answer think every artist wants to do that. It's not just me. And that's what I wanted to create, was the setup where there was no clear black and white. I mean, here's the interesting things, David, because I tested this out on my family and my parents and my relatives. I said, if you describe this situation and what they did by taking the guy to the hospital, giving him money, 95% of Indians will say they did everything they should have. Because they would be like, most people wouldn't even do that, which the female protagonist actually tells the brother when he comes. She's like, well, we at least took him then, even though she feels guilty about it a bit. She would have gone inside and taken, made sure he had care. But most people in an Indian context would say, well, what else did you expect them to do? Because if they went inside, they'd have to file a police case. And then he's a small businessman. He would be harassed to no ends, right? And it would just like massively affect their life, right? But they did everything. I mean, they took him to the hospital, left him outside, gave him money. What more do you want? Now, if the guy decided not to go inside because it wasn't, he thought he'd keep the money, then that's his problem. But I love creating those situations, because now we can have a discussion, because, it's like, where does our responsibility stop? Because ultimately what the film's asking is that the question, as you see, there are constantly gates and barriers. And I find the car to be a fantastic manifestation, a fantastic sort of thing in these developing countries. Because if you think of a car, it's like this metallic bubble that we've created, which allows us to move through the society where we don't want to actually brush into anybody because it's too much, right? Mm-hmm. And when your car runs into somebody and the door has to open, drama begins, Yep. And in a way, the whole movie is about the process of this person getting inside their bubble. He first gets into their car, then he gets into their house, then his daughter, the little girl, gets into the house, then finally they all get into the house. So it's this progression of barriers breaking, right? And them being forced to confront the consequences of these divisions. And I think so for me, yes, there's absolutely, this idea was to make sure we are not taking sides, actively taking sides. We are keeping the conversation alive by having different sides to the thing, absolutely.
Yeah, and the statement of the car as a bubble is, I think, is such a great statement, especially that opening shot. I was like, I was enthralled when you're seeing kind of how tight these spaces are. And I've watched, films set in India before, but I don't think I've gotten that sense of claustrophobia that when you're in this bubble and you're kind of navigating around people and just like hair's breadths away from colliding
to someone.
It's such a fascinating shot. And then even also the kind of with the themes, even this like car versus rickshaw collision is this kind of like modern upper class India versus traditional lower class India. It's such a, this film is just layers upon layers, and I love kind of unpacking. So this film was filmed in Lucknow. What was it like in Lucknow? What was it like, filming there? Had you filmed in India before? Or was that kind of a whole new experience as well?
No, it was a whole new experience. The only few short films I made have all been in the US. No, it was, and as I said, I don't think it would have been possible. It's almost a miracle I feel I got this film done, which every independent filmmaker feels about their first film, I can bet. But no, I think a lot of credit must go to the crew, not to me, and especially to Karthikeya, who's a very successful art house producer. Actually, what happened, if I can share a little bit of background, the script, I just had a script, and fortunately, the National Film Development Corporation, which is an apex government body, organizes this co-production market in India every year, which is the largest co-production market in South Asia, where basically they select about 17 projects and they give them a platform to come and pitch to film executives and distributors from across the world. So about 300 people there. So my script got selected as one of the 17. And I was given this platform, and Karthikeya was at the market. And I had seen Karthikeya's earlier films and just admired the work he was taking on. It was challenging, interesting, So I literally went up to him, I really want to work with you. Could you read the script? And he said, look, I only work with these few directors and I'm not really looking to add to, and I think I was just like that pestering housefly that won't go away, which you see a lot of in India. And so
you're like Mr. Murthy, right? You just kept, you like showed up at his dinner. I was like, hey, here's my script.
almost. If we were in the US, I might have a stalking order against me. So somehow I got him to read the script, and then he was like, yeah, it's kind of interesting, but I just didn't go away. He thought he'd read the script, I'd go away. And so finally he came on board, and then it was really this journey of finding, how are we going to do this? And interestingly, what happened was that I grew up in Lucknow, so I really knew the city well, but Lucknow is not a city which is photographed by Bollywood much, and so it's not like Bombay where you've got facilities available. You just ring the bell and they're like, oh yeah, here's the money and move in, or like New York or LA. It's like and the house was so critical in this film, right? Because we need to understand why he wants to leave and how it's in this crowded place. And literally we went for a year and a half, door to door, knocking doors, ringing bells, and people coming out and us telling them, look, we want to shoot a movie. And they were like, oh, that sounds cool. Yeah, come in. And we were like, no, you'll have to leave your house for 25 days. And they were like, you guys are mad. Why would we ever do that? So it was like trying to find this one house. And finally, year and a half, we couldn't find the exact home, but we found this in this really crowded location, which you can imagine now with all the audio challenges that we had to face. But Pranshul, who was our audio, sound person, credit to him, he just fought all these things, didn't ever complain, but just made it work. And then my production designers, Prashant and Satish, young guys, production designers, came in and said, look, what do you want? Let's figure out how we're going to work with this house and make it happen, right? Mm-hmm. And they were just terrific. So literally, as you know, to make a film takes a village. I mean, I wish I had fallen in love with painting, This is not, it's like self-flagellation trying to make a film.
Yeah,
but at the end of the day, I think the crew, just my assistant directors were fantastic. The cinematographer, it was just, I was very fortunate to have a great team.
And finding the house wasn't your only, like in the notes, it sounds like the cast itself was also very difficult because you wanted to cast local actors, yes, local, performers. So, what was the process of finding this cast? Because it seems like it was, just like the house, it seems like you had this vision and you weren't going to be satisfied until you had it. And I think that obviously shows through on the final product. But what was it like kind of getting this cast together?
No, yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons, as we were talking about the language, I wanted this cast to come from the region, the town around, because otherwise it just won't appear authentic, And in India, David, to share with you, people from Lucknow we are known for our language because it's a very polite language. The way we speak Hindi is very polite. And so I can tell you, if someone starts speaking, I can tell you if they grew up in Lucknow, because just the way they're speaking. And so I was like, even in our country, in India, everyone knows that. And so to just transplant actors from Bombay or Delhi, where all the actors are, it just would not be true. People would say, oh, okay, it's not real. And for me, so we decided we were going to get all our secondary cast from the state. And so we were traveling. We went to multiple cities looking for people working in theater who've never worked in film. There were many people who acted in this film who've never been in front of a camera before, They were doing other jobs, but they were working on weekends in theater, stuff like that. But we were very fortunate with the three main characters, because Vikas comes from while he doesn't come from my state, he comes from a state which is adjoining, which is also a Hindi-speaking state. But what was great about him, the guy who plays Shirish, is he's one of the best-known dialect coaches in Bollywood. So he really is all about the language. And he was so dedicated, he decided to move to Lucknow a month before the shoot, stayed at my parents' house, just went around, met business people, heard people, how they talk. He hired a driver and would drive with him through the city, talking to the driver, trying to figure out the dynamic. It was really great dedication, and so grateful just for the project. Saloni, who plays Geeta, had been in Karthikeya's earlier film, and I'd seen her there. She'd done a terrific job. It was so neat. I'd opened at Venice, and so I knew her, and I sort of felt she brought that feminine elegance that character embodies. About this very sort of this figure, almost like a mythical figure in that context. But again, the challenge was she's not from Lucknow, so she also made the extra effort of going there earlier, spending time with women in that class, who were living that protected lifestyle, how they would interact with help, and and observing that and taking it in, which is very different from a metropolis like Bombay or Delhi, where these people live. And finally, with Nehpal, the person who plays the driver, Manoj, we got very lucky, because that's the part I was very worried about, because I didn't want to hire just someone who plays drivers in Bollywood films. I wanted someone who we would believe this is a person who exists. And Nehpal, while he was educated at the top drama school, National School of Drama in Delhi, in India, he actually came from a rural town just outside Lucknow.
Oh, wow.
So it was just, we lucked out. And I auditioned him for 9 months, because I was so, I was so keen that this character must be totally believable. And the best reward of that to me was when Chris Zala, a producer, saw the first cut. He called me and said, I know this is an actor, but is he really an actor? Is he really a driver? And I was like, fantastic. Now, I feel like I've done my job, because you're from America and you've been to India several times, but you kind of can't tell, which is fantastic. And he knew he's an actor, but, it was a great, that was great. So I think, casting the little girl, we worked with two not-for-profit groups who were running theater workshops in slums. My assistant director, Sakshi Gulati, worked with them. And they she probably went through 100, 150 girls. And we found this one girl, who was very magnetic, And so, I think everybody worked so hard, I mean, it's unbelievable. I'm so happy that people are now getting to watch the film.
Yeah, no, just the level of dedication that you had to this project. I know it's like, it's a very personal project, but I'm just amazed at how much, you and the rest of the cast and the crew put into this film being made. I guess the last question about the movie is, the English title is The Knot. Is there any significance that you put to that? I mean, is it kind of just the way that all the strings intertwine, or was there anything deeper that you had when you were coming up with this title for the I guess the American release?
It's a great question, because I really struggled, because Uljhan, the Hindi word, is a super loaded word, and that's why I really liked it. So Uljhan can mean several things. It can mean just a classic knot, like strings tied together, but it also means this existential anxiety, this unexplainable anxiety. Sometimes we say in Hindi, I don't understand why, but I'm having Uljhan, means I'm feeling some sort of anxiety, which we in the West call existential anxiety. And then it also means being in a sticky situation. I'm caught in Uljhan, which means I'm in a sticky situation. And I just couldn't find an English word that embodied all those, and in English, we have different words to explain very specifically each one of those. And the knot sort of came the closest, that we could come to, where it was, and it really came from, I must credit our French associate producer, Ilan Gerard, for it. He's French, he loved the script, and he was like, I feel it's the knot. And even though he's French, he knows really good English. He said, I really feel like it's the knot, because it's about strings being, tied, but the knot also, sometimes we say it's like in the pit of my stomach, right? I feel a knot. And so it was kind of the closest, and it of course could mean you're in a sticky situation. I'm caught in a knot, here, you got to help me out. So I feel like it was the closest that I could come up with. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I was trying to think of, what that would, the Hindi title would be in English. And yeah, I couldn't come up with anything. The knot, I think, does fit, because it's, you have the strings intertwined, and then you've got kind of the knot in your stomach when you're anxious. So it has multiple meanings as well.
Yeah.
So I watched this film last night and again this morning, and I sat down, I had my snacks. I was like, okay, we're going to watch a a Hindi film, so I've got like 3 hours. I'll wait for the intermission, and then I was like, oh, it's a normal sized movie. was that always the way it was, or was that edited down? I'm not sure how much you shot for this movie.
Oh, we shot way too much, and that's been my number one lesson. You make mistakes as a first time feature sort of director, and that's when my next project, I'm sort of going to be at a script level much more. I'm thinking so much more about, sort of, because they're limited resources and you don't want to waste them. And but we shot a lot, we edited. The film was, again, thanks to NFDC, they select every year 5 films from India, where they bring you into a work in progress lab, and they invite these really experienced editors from the West, which we could never afford,
Wow.
really people cutting big films, and they give you a week with them. You sit with your film, your editor, and this mentor editor. And so Lizzie Gelber was our mentor editor, who's a very experienced editor in Europe, and she sat down, saw the film several times, and guided us. And that allowed us to cut down the film substantially. I mean, she really had us reimagine the film and really questioned everything. Why do we need this? I know it's kind of interesting, it's beautiful, but who cares?
Mhm.
You have a stronger film if you kind of can keep bringing it down. So it's a learning process, but we're very fortunate that because Lizzie, Vibhav, my editor, really Vibhav Nigam, really worked hard. I mean, we worked for good all through the pandemic. We basically worked every day for hours, he in India, myself in New York, editing online with each other. But he did a terrific job. It was his first feature as well. So yeah, again, it's all about the people,
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic process. One of the scenes I assume Lizzie cut was I was expecting at the end, once the credits started rolling, for this big Bollywood dance number to happen, and then I was like, wait, what's going on? So,
I'm sorry to have disappointed you.
yeah, no, I think it's a very, it seems like this film just had a lot of, obviously the film is a quality film, but has a lot of breaks to kind of help it along the way too, that kind of turned into this very tight movie. So it's fascinating to hear, and the dedication of everyone involved is amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. It's I feel embarrassed to be sitting here representing the film with you, because it's really the effort of hundreds of people, not just me, and 25 of them who really gave everything for it, at least.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I'd like to move. I call it the lightning round. It's just very lightweight questions that kind of relate to the characters or things that happened. In this film, there are not as many lightweight questions to ask, so I'll do my best. You can obviously pass on any of them. I won't be offended at all, but I try to keep them answerable.
Okay.
So the first question is, have you ever bought a plot of land?
Yes, I have, actually.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I tell you, it's not fun in India.
Oh, wow.
There's so many things that can go wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, that seemed like that whole process to get that land just seemed like a nightmare. And I thought that was, I guess, going back into the interview, that was fascinating to see as well, because I expect, India is it has such a disparity, but you also have a ton of technology, and it's kind of a tech hub of the world. And then you see this loan office where there's just stacks of paper, and no one has a computer, and like a chair chained to a desk. I was just like, whoa.
And pigeons.
Yeah,
those
and pigeons
were living there. I didn't place them there.
Oh.
David, it's crazy. The production design, when we walked into that office, I said to Karthikeyan, this is the office we need, because we literally have to do nothing. This is exactly. But I want, it's files, dust laden files with pigeon poop on them.
Oh, wow.
That's literally your records.
And so I guess going back to the film, also there was a scene where he's talking to the loan officer, the manager, and he grabs a chair and he pulls it out to sit, and it's chained. Was that
It was
scripted,
there.
or was that?
No. When I was doing location recce, I found that, and I said, I've never seen this in a movie. They do that in government offices, because I presume people take the chairs away. I don't know. It's crazy, But so when I saw that, I was just fascinated. I was like, and it had so many layers to it, like you're chained, you can't just, there's no escape. I mean, but that was just like, I wasn't trying to make a point. It was there. And so I decided I was going to use it because it just shows how this guy really has nowhere to go. You know, get a chair if you don't.
That was a great little scene. Okay, so going back to the lightweight question, this is also fascinating. I love hearing about this this process. What is the craziest thing you have done to try to meet someone?
Oh God!
You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
No, I gotta think. I'll pass. If I come back to it, maybe. Yeah, it's a great question. I want to now think about it, but
yeah, it's like, have you ever gone to some place knowing that someone was going to be there to try to kind of work your way into that conversation, something like that. But
yeah.
Have you ever accidentally hit something with your car? I know that the initial impetus of this film was a real incident, but have you ever accidentally hit something with a car? Obviously you don't have to answer this question as well. You can pass.
Interesting. It's so funny. I mean, I was just recounting it yesterday to my wife. A few years back, and it was a French friend of mine, French American friend of mine, and we had traveled to my village, which is in the mountains in India, in Himalayas. I was going there, and I was taking him because we were filming sort of some footage, researching a script. And literally, we were driving in this jungle in the mountains in the Himalayas, and out of nowhere, and we were driving very slowly, out of nowhere, a guy came flying on his bike, literally at us, and smacked into the vehicle and went flying. And we were like, what the hell happened? And there was nothing around. Now you're like, why does this keep happening to you? I have no idea. And I just sort of went, and I saw this guy and I said, what happened? And he was completely drunk. The guy was completely drunk. And I mean, he had consumed liquor. And I called the ambulance, and they said, yeah, we'll be there in 3 hours. And we were like, that's insane. So I put him in the car. We put him in the car. We drove him to the hospital. And he's yelling throughout because there are bumps in the road, right? And he's broken his leg. It was, and this my American friend who's never been to India. This is day one in India. He's like, I want to go back right away, Anyway, so we take him to this hospital, and when we get to the hospital, of course, the attending people there have all gone to have tea, and they tell me, oh. And I'm like, well, this guy needs, and they've established the ER on the 4th floor. I have no idea why the elevator doesn't work.
Oh my gosh.
It's like a bad drama movie. And so my friend and I run up, we bring a stretcher, we put this guy on a stretcher, go up 4 floors. It's so, that was one that's clearly fresh in my memory because I was just recounting it yesterday.
That sounds like a terrible, like a dark comedy film right there.
It's totally a dark comedy. Absolutely.
You had to carry him up the stairs to get
4th floor.
That's insane.
And why would you have trauma on the 4th floor is beyond me.
I don't know.
And the elevator hasn't been working for 3 months in the small town in the mountains,
It seems like a terrible idea, but I guess hopefully it all worked out, at least.
Worked out, yeah.
All right. So going from that,
where do we go from that? Sorry.
No. This is fascinating. Have you ever worked in like an office setting?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I went to film, I worked in business for years to survive, and so I have. And then now I'm a teacher. I'm a professor. So yes, I have.
Have you ever? Do you still send, or do you send sweets as like a thank you, or not a bribe, but yeah.
I actually I'm trying to do that in America, and I just sent my screenwriting mentor. When the film sort of got its break, I just sent him a box of chocolates.
Right.
He's right now in Wisconsin. So yeah.
Awesome. So have you ever had a driver?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My parents have a driver. I don't care, but my parents have a driver.
And then the last question is, where would you build your dream home?
Oh gosh.
Or maybe multiple. I don't
Next
know.
On that plot which Shirish wants.
that was a nice plot of land.
Actually, that is it took me over that year and a half when we were looking for places. I said, this is beautiful. And I said, what's going to be sad in in 5 years, this will be a terrible place. Because what's happening with these Indian cities is they're just growing and they're just encroaching everything, right? And so if you remember that scene when the, you know, in the first opening of the film, that hut there, and the camera moves, you know, in the hut, right? This boy, and they, when they walk away, you see the distance. If you notice, you will see this massive, ugly construction happening. And I just wanted to show this stark contrast of this beautiful thing next to this sort of water body with farms and trees, which are all going to get engulfed in 5 years, because you're already seeing it, you know, getting there slowly. And so in a way, it's Shirish wanting to run away from all that. It's just a pipe dream, you know. It's that's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, and then in the way that at the start, you know, he's kind of having, he smells the air, and it kind of, you know, smells as clean. But yeah, as the city expands and as, you know, it gets more crowded, that's going to go away as well. That's that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So the film is out. I believe it came out yesterday, March 31st, 2021. So now that the film's out, I assume you're promoting it. But once that's done, do you have any other films on the horizon? Are you writing, directing, or anything like that you've been working on?
Yeah, so you know, the film's going to be over the next 10 days going to be playing in virtual cinema at Santa Barbara International Film Fest, where we are part of the international competition. We're grateful for that. You know, we're one of the 9 films there competing. After that, there are already not yet announced, but there are already a few festivals in the US that have accepted the film. So it'll be awesome. traveling a bit in the US on both coasts. We still are awaiting a European premiere. So we are still sort of in consideration and running at some festivals in Europe right now, and hopefully we'll have that, and in Asia as well. So that's kind of the from the festival standpoint. But really, while I you know I really think to reach people, I'm hoping that the film will get some sort of a release with one of the streaming platforms, so that more people get an opportunity to watch it, I hope. Over the next year or so. Meanwhile, I've been, I'm well deep into several drafts into my second feature, which is also set in Lucknow and also based on a family drama. And I'm working on a TV show. I'm writing a pilot, which is largely based in New York, but has connections going back to India. And that's set in the financial industry, in which I've worked, so sort of writing in that milieu.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'm excited to see both of those. I'm really curious to see what other traumatic experience from your childhood you'll draw from.
Oh my God. David, I will definitely keep you posted, you know, as they develop.
That sounds great. Thank you. This is Ashish Pant. He's the writer and director of Uljhan, or The Knot, which is, as you said, playing in Santa Barbara virtual cinemas for the next 10 days, and then it'll be at other various festivals. It's a fascinating film, and it's a very subtle film. Like I watch a lot of movies. I had to watch it twice to kind of get a lot of some of the little hints and you know, small points that we just talked about. So it's a really fascinating movie. You should definitely watch it once or twice, and yeah, check it out when you can. Thank you so much for joining me.
David, thanks so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. And thanks so much for watching the film and giving it so much thought, you know.
Yeah, no, it was a fascinating movie, and I have a soft spot for Hindi film. I haven't seen a ton, but I try to kind of watch everything I can. So this was perfect.
Thank you.
That was Ashish Pant, the writer and director of The Knot, or Uljhan. It's coming out March 31st, 2021, so you can check it out then. Just maybe don't watch it while you're driving in your car. I want you to pay attention to the road. If you like this interview, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot to make sure all my new interviews go straight to you. And as always, please go to watchyourpass.com for all your movie reviews, interviews, and recommendations. Thank you.